about who I am and how I got to be sitting in my basement here, holding a laptop in my lap. My wife actually took over my office. I've got this office you can see. This is my space where I normally work when I'm not on the road, in the basement of my house here in near Gretna. And my wife does not work at home normally until 2020, so she totally took over my office. So my office is now normally the couch upstairs, but that's fine because I have a job where that works all right. I just need my laptop, and a lot of times in normal circumstances, I'm working in a coffee shop or in an airport, or a press box. Press boxes are great. Would like to see one of those again here before this fall is over. So, like Jen said, I'm Mitch Sherman. I cover Nebraska and college football for The Athletic. The Athletic, hope you know what that is. We just announced that we went over 1 million subscribers this week on September 8th, I think. That milestone was actually passed earlier in the summer. But they announced it with the release of a big update to our app and our website. If you're a subscriber, or even if you're not a subscriber, we're not supposed to advertise that fact, but even if you're not a subscriber, and you guys all should be subscribers, you can get it at the student rate. I don't know, it's not as good as the $1 a month that they're offering right now, but it's still pretty good. So go to one of my stories and sign up for $1 a month right now if you're not a subscriber. It's like the best I think deal we've ever had. But we rolled out this week a new feature of the app, and if you go and you click on the real-time button on the Athletic app, you can see it's like our own version of Twitter, just without like all the BS from fans who are there just to troll us or you. And it allows for more commentary than Twitter does, and like a better interface to react. When I worked at ESPN, we had something similar to this. And in fact, some of the executives from ESPN who introduced like the internal social media engine at ESPN now work at The Athletic, and not surprisingly, like brought this feature to our site and our app. We cover sports in depth all around the world. And what we have done best in 4 years to build this following of 1 million subscribers, which is pretty remarkable considering we've been around 4 years, and like the other publications who have 1 million digital subscribers are like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, which have been around for like 100 years or more apiece. But what we've done to build that up, what we did over the last 4 years, and I've been a part of it for about 18 months, is just write in-depth pieces on sports that you are going to have a hard time finding at other outlets. They're there. ESPN does some of this. Local newspapers do some of this, but we've got like 300 writers. And it is our main priority to provide the kind of content that you don't get on a daily basis at other places. So while some who cover Nebraska football might be writing a story about a recruit who got a scholarship offer, I'm going to try to tell a deeper story about maybe the same subject. And that's what we strive to do. But one thing that we were lacking is having like a news breaking element to our product. And this week, with the change, with the rollout of this new feature on our app that I talked about, like this internal social media engine, that's what you get. So if you go to our site and you go to the React page, I think it says real time, or for me it says React because I'm reacting. For you, it would probably say real time. You can see like a running commentary of like news that is happening, like a timeline you would have on social media. So great new feature, and it's free. You still have to subscribe to get all of the stories, the in-depth stories, but that news part of it is a free feature. And we have an entire news team, news desk, news editors who have been hired here during the pandemic, amazingly, to put this together. So there are jobs out there. I know you guys are all seniors. There are companies that are still hiring. The Athletic, we had layoffs. We laid off 40 plus people on our team in, I believe, June, but we've also been hiring and, building up, especially this news team for this release that we had this week. So I've been at the Athletic for about 18 months. Before that, I was at ESPN for 8 years, covering college football, some Nebraska, some Big 12, Big 10, like the sport in general. Focused on college football recruiting for about the first year or two that I was there in 2011, 2012. And prior to that, I was at the Omaha World Herald as a obviously Nebraska writer, based in Lincoln from my first job out of college from 1998 until 2011. So went through the Frank Solich years with the football program, Bill Callahan, the start of the Pelini years, and then I've been on to the national publications since then. So that's me. That's my career path. I'm a graduate of the college there in May '98. Originally from Omaha. I went to Burke High School, and live with my family now out in Sarpy County. My wife works at Creighton, and my kids are in 8th and 4th grade, and they're in school today and for the last 4 weeks, which is awesome after the previous 5 months. So I can get more into questions and advice and things like that for you guys, but I can hand it over to Garrett to do the same introduction.
Sounds good. Appreciate it, Mitch. Great to see you again after talking to you about Adrian last fall. But
yes,
for my job, I'm Garrett Wright. I'm a feature producer at the Big Ten Network. My main role is on a weekly show called The Journey, which covers football and men's basketball across the conference, but does so in more of a kind of storytelling, featurey way. That's, it covers a little more of the off-field type stories, like who the players are, where they come from, what their background is, those kind of things. So that's kind of my day-to-day. I do other features and other, longer form documentaries. I work on a show called Campus Eats for the Big Ten Network, which is about food places all around the college towns in the Big Ten. So just a lot of different hats, but the main role is the Journey, which is I think it's 9 episodes of football and 9 of basketball. So that takes up about 18 weeks of production, and then a lot more pre-production as we gear up for the season. For me, I graduated the College of Journalism in December of 2009. So I've been out almost 11 years now, which feels crazy. I've been all over the place since. I went and got a job at ESPN right out of college up in Bristol, which I had an internship up there while I was in college for a semester, which helped me land that job right away out of school. Was there for 6 months, really did not enjoy Connecticut or working for ESPN, to be honest. And that was more just, I wanted to kind of have my hands on everything, shoot, edit, all of that, because I worked at Husker Vision when I was going through the College of Journalism. So I kind of had that skill set that I wanted to do a little more than just talk about. So I went and got a job at Elon University in North Carolina. Worked there for 2 years in their athletic department, doing all of their kind of big screen video, team highlights, those things. Turned that into a job at Minnesota, University of Minnesota, for 5 years in their athletic department. Worked there in Minneapolis, and then about 3.5 years ago, got a job here at the Big Ten Network doing feature production, and have just been here ever since. So it's been this kind of crazy journey of 5 different states since the time I graduated 11 years ago. But I think in the sports industry, you'll find that's pretty common.
Yeah. And where are you home base out right now?
Home base out of Chicago.
Okay.
So that's our network offices are just north of downtown Chicago, and so I live here.
Nice. Great. Anybody have any preliminary questions before we get started on some deep dives? I think they're all really tired or something. We actually talked about the ESPN book this week. We had a reading and Those Guys Have All the Fun. And I asked the question, who wants to work at ESPN, with the emphasis on Bristol, Connecticut. And it was funny. They were like, not really, not so much. So I lived in Syracuse, so I understand. I got the hell out of there pretty soon. So anyway, Garrett, can you kind of, because I'm curious, like, what goes into your job as a feature producer, and how long of a lead time do you have, and how much time do you have to work on one of those episodes?
Sure. It really depends on the week and the story. I'll just kind of give you a broad rundown. I would say in general, it's, we have about a week to turn it around, where the episode comes out on usually Wednesdays is when our football show episodes come out. And, we're editing a final product maybe Friday, Saturday, Sunday before, and we're out on the road maybe that Monday or Tuesday, Wednesday before. So we have probably from air date to when we start producing the story is probably a little over a week.
Wow.
We're obviously doing some pre-production things as far as setting up interviews, hiring crews, all that stuff, maybe before. But I mean, there have been days where I'm working on a story, it falls through, and 3 hours later I have a new story, and then an hour after that I'm on a plane to State College, Pennsylvania. So it just kind of depends on the week and what's going on. But I would say normally about a week lead time. My role as a producer, that can mean a lot of things, a lot of different places. Sometimes you're very hands-on and you're kind of one-man band type thing. Sometimes you're, more of the project management type producer. And, for me, now that I'm at a network, before it's been more hands-on, I shot, edited, etc. Here at Big Ten Network, it's a little more story management, feature management, where, I'm asked to kind of ideate, come up with ideas, pitch them in meetings. And then once I get my story assignment, I'm in charge of contacting the schools, setting up the interviews, hiring crews, because we usually hire locally for camera and sound operators. So if I'm coming to Lincoln, I'll hire someone local rather than travel someone into Lincoln. From there I come in, I make sure the look and feel of the setup is what I want. I work with the communications people at the universities to, pick locations and all that. And then from there, I do the interviews. I'm all off camera, thankfully. So I'll write the questions. I'll come up with the interview questions, kind of figure out which direction I want it to go. Then I'll bring it all back, all the footage back. I'll work with a full-time editor. Usually I'll put together a rough cut, kind of an A-roll sequence where I can lay out the bites in order that I want, and a little bit of maybe my B-roll. And at the very least know what B-roll I want to use and where, and then work with a professional editor. Usually a day or two we'll have an edit. So probably anywhere from 8 hours to 16 hours to put together 6 to 7 minutes of footage with an editor, and a lot of lead time before that, actually out in the field and everything as well. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. It can be crazy. I mean, I've literally booked a flight and had to sprint home from the office and pack a bag and go in like 3 hour turnaround from when I booked a flight before. So it doesn't happen a ton, but it's a crazy job that changes fast during the season.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And then for you, Mitch, I know you have done breaking news and kind of the daily grind, but now you have more time to sit with it. And I know you do a lot of trips to athletes' houses and travel. So can you kind of talk through your feature writing process and what the schedules look like? And this is pre-COVID. Because we're going to get to the COVID.
Yeah, it's definitely different with COVID. Trying to write feature stories. I mean, you almost got to find people who are willing to go out and meet with you face to face. At least cover at a big university like Nebraska, because man, the access to coaches and to athletes over the last 6 months has just been few and far between. I mean, there have been those rare instances where they've had something that they wanted them to say, like on August 10th, the day before the Big Ten voted to shut down, where Nebraska put a few people on Zoom. But for the most part, yeah, it's been tough to go out and talk to people. But we still have to write stories, and I would say the feature part of it has cut down a little bit, just because there has been like such an interesting ebb and flow to the news. I mean, despite there being such a lack of sports for most of the last 6 months, I mean, you wouldn't know from watching TV last night. That was crazy to see. NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, college football, and NHL, U.S. Open tennis, whatever you wanted to watch, you seem to be able to get it yesterday. Of course, that's been like the huge exception to what we've had for the most part in since March. But even in the absence of regular sports, there's been an ebb and flow to the news that has allowed for people like me on site, around universities to cover stories, from the conference level, from the national level. I mean, I've written more stories about, medical news or legal issues. I mean, today it was like scheduling craziness. I wrote a story about with like the backdrop of this being the first weekend of major college football. I wrote about scheduling craziness at the high school level, and how some high schools in Nebraska, I focused on Bellevue West. They're the defending state champs, and had two of their first three opponents fall off because of COVID tests, or one was a complete district shutdown. Omaha Public Schools shut down. So their first week opponent gone. Week 2, they played. Week 3, they were supposed to play, but their opponent dropped out because of a COVID situation. They tried to schedule 2 more games. They finally did schedule a game. I wrote a big story about how all of this, came together, and like how nimble and, quick to react these people have to be at the high school level. Story came out this morning at 7 a.m., published on our site, 6 a.m., whatever. And I got a text from the coach at like an hour ago saying we were getting on the bus to go to North Platte, and they called and canceled. They had a JV player who had been around another team with a positive case. They were concerned about contact tracing, and boom, the game's off. So before they even got on the road for the 4-hour drive to North Platte, game's canceled. Second one in 3 weeks. So they're just having a crazy time. So those stories are obviously unique to 2020, and important to write, important to tell. And as for the feature writing, like to answer your question, my process in going through that in normal times is, just to kind of find an in, to find like the right way to get information about the person I'm writing on. You want a willing subject. So like, for instance, I wrote last year about Garrett Nelson. Was a freshman linebacker from Gering, Nebraska, played at Scottsbluff High School. He was a kind of a media fascination in the first part of his freshman year, because he was really energetic, was good interview, like said colorful, interesting things, which isn't always the case with football players at Nebraska. I mean, sometimes they're kind of taught to be boring, and that's not Garrett. He's in your face. He's running like the crazy defensive line drills in pregame with the defensive linemen, even though he's a linebacker. When you talk to him, he's fun. So, and he was playing as a true freshman. So that kind of drew me to wanting to write about him. And in the bye week, after the Minnesota game mid-season, I had already sat down with Garrett a few times, and I went out to his home in Gering, flew into Denver, drove up to Panhandle and, hung out with his parents for an afternoon. Had great access, availability. We went to his high school. I went to the gym where he worked out. I went to his house. So, that's how you really tell a good story. And I mean, it's the same way with, what Garrett was talking about with TV. Like, the more you can learn about a person, the more inside their story you can get. It's going to be heavily reflected in the final product. So doing that on the phone is not ideal. Doing it on Zoom, not as good. So that's part of what has made this year so difficult, because we don't have the same kind of opportunities to be able to travel and do stuff like that. I mean, at the Athletic, I haven't traveled outside of like 50 miles from home for a story since the beginning of the year, really. Didn't do a ton of, I didn't do a ton of that like in January and February, just because of the time of year that it was, and like the where we were at in the calendar, in the season. If I had known what was coming, I'd have been all over the place, flying around, doing as much reporting as I could. But like in December, I went and did similar work, similar to what I talked about with the Garrett Nelson story, with a few players on the road who were about to sign with Nebraska in their 2020 class. I went to Oklahoma and spent some time with Savion Morrison, running back from Tulsa, who's now a freshman in the program. I went to Florence, Alabama. Muscle Shoals is the name of the town, and just a little town in like the very northern tip of Alabama, and spent some time with Logan Smothers and his family, freshman quarterback on the football team now. So for me, it's all about getting to these people, and when they're recruits, before they officially get into the program, is a great time to do it, because that there's an opportunity there to meet them like on their turf, as opposed to when they get to Lincoln, then it's like on Nebraska's turf, and like access is really controlled. I mean, Garrett, about this, you're doing the interviews when they want, it's like, hey, you've got 15 minutes to talk to this guy because he's got to get to the training table, and then he's got a tutoring session, and then he's got an exam. It's like, all right, well, I wish we wouldn't have scheduled the interview on this day, but you take what you can get. And when they're younger, like before they get to school, I found for me that it's a great time to get to know them. They haven't like necessarily learned the ways to be boring, like I said. And some of the best stories come from these players, when they're still in high school, but they're headed into the program. Another thing I would add, and Jen, and you've heard me talk about this before. For me, I'm like in my 40s, so I tend to relate really well to the players' parents, and I found players' parents to be a great source for getting to know who these guys really are. Even if it's just a story that I'm writing on somebody where I'm not going to do a bunch of traveling, still having an opportunity to reach out to their parents and go a little more in depth is something that almost always adds huge value to what I'm writing in a feature story. One example where I didn't have to travel was a piece I did last September on Wan'Dale Robinson. And a huge part of Wan'Dale's story was the story of his dad, who spent 14 years of Wan'Dale's life, 14 of the first 18 years of Wan'Dale's life in prison. And he was a drug dealer, and he's out and has changed his life, and he's a gym owner and a personal trainer and a businessman, and he's a new father. Wan'Dale has a little sister who was born within the last year. Wow. And Dale, his dad, was actually like a big. He was the story, as it turned out. But I arranged to meet up with him around the opener last year, around the South Alabama game. So we connected in Lincoln on the Friday afternoon before the season opener last year, and sat down at his hotel in downtown Lincoln. And I talked to Wan'Dale, of course, too. But the stories are not always the best stories are not always the ones that are placed right in front of you. Like if I'm writing about Wan'Dale, like I can get him on a Monday at a press conference sitting at Memorial Stadium for 10 minutes, while 17 other reporters are like, anxiously waiting to get their 5 minutes too. But that's not where you get the best stuff. The best stuff is like out in the real world. And I guess that's like the thing that I always try to remember and fall back on when I'm reporting a feature story.
Yeah, it's really great. I love that quote. Not always the one placed right in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
Try to teach that every day, right? Garrett, can you talk about how your job has been affected by COVID?
Sure.
Or has it? Because Big Ten, I mean.
a little bit. Yeah. This doesn't look like a normal fall for us. But I mean, yeah, it's crazy. To Mitch's point, I haven't really left the vicinity of Chicago in about it was actually 6 months ago today. I was covering the Nebraska basketball game in Indianapolis. And it was the last one that happened in the Big Ten. The last Big Ten sporting event was 6 months ago today. So
where Hoiberg got sick on the bench, huh?
He did. Yeah, that was an interesting day. I mean, like I had done a story on the Hoibergs and his son Jack playing for Michigan State about, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks before. So, I went up, I shook hands with Coach Hoiberg before the game, was saying hey to the staff. I worked for Doc Sadler when I was a student at Husker Vision. I traveled with them. So I know that staff really well. And we went to Italy with them this last summer for a documentary for the Big Ten Network. So, I'm really close with them. And, all of a sudden after that game, I'm getting a little nervous when I'm seeing how he is. But thankfully, everything turned out well. He wasn't COVID positive, but all that to say, it's been weird in that 6 months ago today, I was covering a game and then it just stopped. I mean, we were at the arena that next morning when we got the call. And I haven't left home for work in 6 months. So it's definitely different. It's been good in the sense that, we still, my department being more feature focused, there's still a lot we can do. We're not as game focused as some of the other departments. So we're able to, still try and come up with, stories to tell and, evergreen content. And, honestly, we're so busy during football and basketball season normally that we've had a lot of, different ideas and things we've wanted to do departmentally that we just have trouble getting it all in during a normal year. And we're kind of falling back on some of those ideas now. But it's just, it's been a lot of work from home, a lot of Zoom interviews, a lot of, trying to get athletes and coaches to kind of shoot their own videos, if we're doing like a video diary or, whatever, and submit them to us. I know big picture for our company that the studio department has gone back into the office to some extent and is doing some in-studio work. So there is kind of a slow trickle back into the office from BTN. But I think to Mitch's point, I mean, the lack of travel is very weird. Ever since I've been at BTN, I've been Marriott's highest status level, and now I haven't been in a hotel in 6 months, and that's a little weird. And, doing Zoom interviews is hard. I think building relationships and making connections and, being able to build those relationships quickly in an interview setting is super important in this job. And that's really hard to do when you're just jumping on a Zoom with someone. To Mitch's point about meeting in person, like that's so important. And getting to know, Wandale's dad, how that might pay dividends down the road because you sat and had a meal with him as opposed to just a quick Zoom interview. To me, this job is all about building relationships. And that's the one thing that's been way harder since COVID, but thankfully job wise, it's just, it hasn't changed a ton other than with no football season. We're not doing the journey right now, the show that I work on. But I know that we're all looking forward to football coming back whenever the Big Ten says it's safe to do so here at BTN.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So how do you build relationships on Zoom?
I mean, it's just
for the room.
I would say that the nice thing is that people it feels like that people have a little more free time now, where you're not getting slotted into that you got 5 minutes with this guy type of window as often right now, just because it's not as busy. So you maybe have a little more time at the start of interviews where you don't have to jump right in with questions. But when you're doing an interview with Scott Frost, normally it's the time that I have to say hi to him and try and build a relationship with him or a rapport is about the 60 seconds while my sound guy is miking him up. Right. And now I can kind of, hey, how you doing? What's been going on in your world? And not necessarily with Scott tends to be a little more business-like, Coach Frost, but some of the players and some of the coaches will chat with you a little bit. And to me, it's just it goes back to a lot of the same things that you do when you're sitting down in person for an interview, is just trying to find those common points of connection. I'll just go back to Scott Frost, Coach Frost, just for example, and this is hypothetical, but talking about a friend of mine from college who grew up in Wood River, or if I saw an anecdote from practice that he talked about the other day that went viral or was funny, mention that to him and ask him about that. You just have to find commonalities and build relationships quick. And I don't think that changes a lot from in-person to Zoom. It's just, it feels less personal when you're not sitting right across from them. I think the principles are the same, but it maybe is less effective over Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah. My favorite thing back when I was reporting was the art of hanging out and just going there when I didn't even need anything, just hanging out and can I just come hang out? And that's gone. So that's hard for, I think, young budding journalists to, they can't just go hang out on Zoom for no reason. All right. So I'll open it up. I obviously want some advice for what you think students now should be looking toward the sports media business for, but anybody have questions? There's 30 of you on here. There's got to be one question.
I got a question.
Yay.
Why does ESPN have the reputation that it does? Why does Bristol have the reputation that it does? And I don't know, Mitch, if you ever worked in Bristol in your time at ESPN, but I've just always wondered that.
Well, to start, I didn't do a lot of work in Bristol. Usually when I went to, so I was there 8 years, at the company 8 years. And usually when I would go to Bristol, it was for like a retreat, all of our college football people were getting together for 3 days, or, all of our college football and college basketball people were getting together for 3 days, and they'd, throw you in a hotel and you'd have wall-to-wall meetings and go to the ESPN cafeteria and walk through the newsroom and the sports center set and, see the ESPN radio studios and go to the store, and then boom, back to the Hartford airport and you're out. So, I went a few times for a car wash, where they call it a car wash because it's just like a conveyor belt of coaches or athletes who are coming through. They I'd go for the Big 12 car wash. It usually would be right after Big 12 media days in July every year. So, Bob Stoops, Cliff Kingsbury, Mike Gundy, Bill Snyder, they're all just from one stop to the next, where they go from one show to another show. And then there would be a group of writers in a room, and they would go around the room and sit for a few minutes with us as one stop on the car wash. So those are about the only times I went. I didn't go to Bristol for a job interview when they hired me. I didn't go there for really much of anything except these little visits. Well, what do you mean by their reputation? ESPN has a lot of different reputations. If you're you mean you guys just, like Jen said, you read the book.
We read the intro chapter. Yeah.
Yeah. What's that book was basically what about how ESPN is just kind of a good old boys club, and there's I don't know. I wasn't there in the 80s. My experiences at ESPN were generally pretty good. I didn't experience some of the things. First of all, I'm a white male. So I'm not going to experience some of the things that like ESPN has been criticized for throughout its history. But like I said, my experiences were fine. I enjoyed the job. I left on my own. I could have continued there and signed another contract with them in 2019. But I wanted this opportunity at the Athletic. I wanted to try something new. The work that I was doing in college football had gotten a little stale over I'd say the 2 seasons previous to me leaving. Hey, it's a giant company. It's the biggest sports media company in the world. And, people have had all kinds of different experiences working there and dealing with the people there. And for sure, there has been sexism and prejudice and all kinds of things that have been like exposed in media. And then there's also like good things about the company and the work that they've done. I mean, they've done amazing journalism through the years on, TV shows and on the print side of thing. And there's, I have a lot of friends who still work there and still do great work there. So I think, they're kind of a target because everybody's kind of pointing at ESPN, wanting to get to ESPN, knock them down. And that's, I think in some cases justified. And to answer your question, yeah, I think that's a part of the reason that ESPN has, the reputation is probably well earned. There's things that have happened in Bristol that, aren't great. But I also think that they live with a constant target on their back.
Yeah, I think that's all pretty fair. I mean, just I lived there for 3 months when I was doing my internship in school, and another 6 months after college when I was up there. And it's a good place to work. Like when I say I left and I didn't enjoy it, that was more just me personally and where I wanted my career to go. Less about ESPN broadly. I've worked with ESPN since in like freelance roles and things like that, and really enjoyed the people I've worked with from there. So to me, it was more about like Bristol is a small town, and it's about 45 minutes outside of Hartford, which is the nearest major town. So it's not the middle of nowhere. It's absolutely not, but it's definitely not a major metropolitan area that, when you think of destination jobs, you think, New York, LA, Chicago, those kind of places. And, the destination job in sports is Bristol. And that can be frustrating, to people who have made it and want to live in this like cool metropolitan area, and you're being asked to move to Bristol. But, the network itself, it's fantastic. And I enjoyed it. I would, be willing to go back at any point now. It was just more for me, when I say I didn't enjoy it there, it was more because I wanted to have my hands on everything. And at ESPN, you're really asked to specialize because they have so many people, doing each role. They want everyone to be kind of an expert in their role. And for me, I just wanted to, kind of have my hand on everything early in my career. And it's kind of gone the other way, where now I love that I get to specialize at this point in my career, about 10 years out of school. So no, I think that to Mitch's point, the reputation is probably deserved as you read that book. I read that book about a year after I was out of ESPN, and it was cool to kind of see the culture, how it all came together, and stories that you didn't know. A lot of the stuff that I experienced at ESPN, just from like a leadership and company culture standpoint, made so much more sense after reading that book. Like that should be a required reading for anyone who is getting hired at ESPN or wants to work at ESPN. And it's funny, the version I have, the hardback version, my picture is actually, I'm in one of the pictures in the book. I was there for 6 months, and it's a wide shot of the cafe, or outside the cafe on the patio, and I'm sitting at one of the tables. was blown away when I opened that book, and I had no idea that a photographer was even there while I was there. But yeah, I mean, I just think it's a good place to work with probably the reputation that it deserves, and it's not for everyone.
The cafe is really funny. And I wasn't like Garrett where I was working there every day, even for a short period of time, but like we would always eat at the cafe when on visits. And it feels like being in one of those ESPN commercials when you're eating at the cafe. Like I'm standing in line waiting for a sandwich, and like Sage Steele is right next to me. I specifically remember that one time, like, and she wasn't like on the NBA broadcast at the time. But I had seen her on SportsCenter, and I was like, I recognize her. Who is that? And I couldn't, put a name to the face or face to the name to the face. And then, like a month later, I'm watching SportsCenter. I'm like, oh yeah, that. She was standing next to me in line at the cafe. Or you see, Kenny Mayne sitting there, eating a bowl of soup or whatever. It is kind of funny. And then, like they have, or like Adam Schefter is walking across campus and he's got like his mic pack on his belt at all times, because at any moment, he might be needed, like at that moment, like in 30 seconds, you're needed to be in the SportsCenter studio. So he's just like from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. whenever he leaves campus that night, he's 100% of the time mic'd up. And there's like 3 cell phones, like in orbit around him. That's like the things that you would expect to see on those This Is SportsCenter commercials. It is actually like that when you're on the campus.
Yeah, my favorite was I think I had Alex Rodriguez behind me one day when he was still playing, and then like 2 people in front of me in line was Lou Holtz. It was just like within a 3-person span, it was me, A-Rod, and Lou Holtz. Like just the weirdest stuff that happens in the cafe for sure.
Yeah.
That's funny. More questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I think this might pertain to the both of you. When you I'll call it a dry interview, if you're like interviewing someone and can't really get them to open up, do you guys have any techniques on how to maybe work your way in slowly to get that person to open up to you? Or how do you go about it with that way?
That's a good question.
I'd say sometimes it's just probably not going to happen. Like it's not meant to be. There are people out there who just either don't want to be interviewed or really just don't have anything interesting to say about that subject. But I'll just try to lighten it up. You talk, Garrett, about finding a way to connect with people, whether that's like in a breaking the ice situation where you sit down with them and it's just small talk for a period of time. If you get past that, or even if you don't do that, like because maybe you don't have time to do that, and then the interview is going poorly, and you can just tell you're not getting like useful information. I'll try to maybe just like back it up a bit, and in like a comfortable way, start talking about some stuff that I know probably isn't pertaining to that piece that I'm writing on, but maybe it's going to get them to loosen up. The story that I'm doing could be about like a teammate of theirs, and they're just like really not into talking about that person. Okay, let me ask about you, like when you played in high school, or people are usually more interested in talking about themselves. Not always, but in more cases than the opposite, than they are in like telling you a lot of stuff about somebody else. So I just try to relate in some way, but I mean, it's not always going to happen. Like there are times where you do an interview and you're not going to get anything. Every time I do a big story, or even little stories, there's usually like somebody that I interviewed for that story who doesn't end up getting quoted. That's fine. I mean, not there's lots of stuff that's left on the cutting room floor. So don't feel like because you're doing an interview, like you have to use a soundbite or in a print, like a quote, or even attribute something to that person. There's plenty of times where you would have no idea from reading something that I wrote that I talked to so-and-so for that piece.
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty well said. I don't have a lot to add to that. I think that Mitch kind of hit the nail on the head. You try and push them, maybe go outside what you initially planned to try and loosen them up, and sometimes they just don't. And there's nothing you can do. It's if people don't want to talk, like a really good skill as an interviewer is knowing when people aren't going to talk, kind of realizing that and just being willing to try and adjust, like Mitch said. And if it still isn't happening, be okay just letting that interview go by the wayside. Let it, don't sit there for half an hour with that person trying to get them to open up if all they're going to give you is one-word answers.
Yep. Yeah, I would just say ask them who else I could talk to. Be like, hey, you got anybody else that's more talkative? Any other questions? I know we're about out of time, but we could talk forever. What advice do you guys have for COVID graduates?
Network your ass off. That applies always, but this industry, like I said, I think it's all about building connections and relationships. And the perk of doing that outside of like sitting down with interviewees is just that do it with people in the industry, because it's good practice just in building relationships and talking to people and cold calling people. When I started this job, I hated just calling people out of the blue, and it felt awkward, and like, get over that quickly. But yeah, just network your butt off. I think that's the key to this industry is relationships, and it'll pay off not only for you personally, but just in your ability to build relationships and talk to people that you don't know that well, which is good job skill to have as well.
And just a follow up real quick, how do you network? Because I think a lot of students are hesitant to be, annoying or, just reach out to strangers or engage with them on Twitter or hit up their DM or like just kind of
be annoying.
Yeah,
that is really how you network when you're first getting your start. When I wanted to work at ESPN, I went and like I got on a to work game when I was a student at Nebraska, and I stayed in touch with the production assistants and the producer, and I ended up getting work at the College World Series for 2 weeks every summer because of that, through that producer. I got, games. I would travel for games while I was in college. I worked Michigan, Ohio State. I worked, a Nebraska game down in Stillwater, Oklahoma at Oklahoma State. Like, I worked all over the country because of that production assistant that I got to know when I worked that one game. And I would email him every week and say, like, I want to work some games. What's in like a 500-mile radius in Nebraska that you have openings for? Like, be a pain in the ass. It's okay. Most people in this industry want to help like young professionals and develop them. So get over the awkwardness. And
if you're introverted, like just by nature, when it comes to your work, get past it. And that was probably kind of me when I got started, and I was lucky that I was able to get a job in the market that I was in. That was what I wanted to do. And then, over the course of that first job working at the Omaha World Herald for as long as I did, I kind of learned the ways of the industry, and that helped get me to ESPN. But for me, like when we're in like normal sports times, like I spend a lot of my time in press boxes or at media events. Just talk to people. If you find yourself in those situations, whether it's 3 times a week or once every 3 months, don't talk to people when they're in the middle of their job, like when they're doing a stand up, but when you're in the elevator, when you're like grabbing a drink, when you're standing in the press box, there's a lot of idle time at sporting events, before games, at halftime. There's every game that I go to, there's a seating chart. So it's like people are basically wearing name tags. Go up and introduce yourself to somebody. Tell them, hey, I really like the work that you do. I'm a student, or, I'm just out of college, and, I'm interested in this. Like, people are generally going to be willing to offer you help. And, Garrett said this, they want to help. So, don't be shy. I would say be adaptable. I've had to write about things I thought I'd seen just about everything over the first, 20 years and 20 plus years of my career. And then 2020 came, and it's like, you haven't seen anything. All these kind of stories that I've had to write these last 6 months, I hope for the next 20 years, I don't have to ever do them again. but I needed to be in a position to be able to keep my job, like legitimately to be able to keep my job from March until now. I had to be able to be in a position to adapt and write stories that I wasn't used to writing, talking to doctors, talking to lawyers, talked to a state senator this week for a story that I wrote. It's just, there's not a football season going on right now, and for the team that I cover. So you got to be adaptable. You got to be innovative, and think outside the box. And the third thing I would say is learn to have thick skin. I mean, it's not going to be applicable for everybody in every position, but more often than not, jobs in sports media, somebody's not going to like something that you did. I mean, right now, it's like that more than ever. People are angry right now. I mean, that's just the way it is. Go look at my social media mentions, the mentions of a lot of the people that I work with. It's crazy, man. They want to make it like, we're reporting and writing on the things that are happening. Like, I'll take the Big Ten as a specific example. We are writing about the fact that the Big Ten is a shit show right now. Like, they can't get out of their own way when it comes to making announcements and like just providing some kind of clarity about what is going on with this football season. And we're writing about it, and people, come to us and say, quit rooting against football. It's like, we're not rooting against football. I want there to be football. Garrett, you certainly want there to be football working at the Big Ten Network, but like, we're covering the stories that are out there. And it's bringing all kinds of negativity toward us in our jobs. And it's not as bad for me as it is for some of my colleagues. I mean, people have had threats, people that I work with. We've had to get our legal team at the Athletic involved with some of this stuff because, a coworker of mine was getting threatening text messages, have to block everything on social media so you don't see it. So yeah, have a thick skin, because those times, while they're not common, are going to come up in your job.